I want to just go back a little bit and tell you sort of our origin story here. So the idea for Kootenay Connect came up during an open space session at KCP's fall gathering in Cranbrook back in 2017. And there was a breakout group and on wildlife corridors, and Michael and I were there among other people, and we were identifying the need to study and map corridors throughout the Kootenays in order to address connectivity at a regional scale. And this conversation was coined Kootenay Connect, and it led to a special session with Mike Proctor a year later at the next KCP fall gathering in Nelson in 2018. And we discussed different approaches to identifying connectivity areas and corridors for the Kootenays. We received the green light from this group and just in time to put in an application to FWCP, which we were successful at. And in our proposal, we just talked about launching an initiative to investigate 12 corridors in our region. And in 2019, we produced this report, which was called a preliminary report because it laid out the rationale and justification for the Kootenay Connect initiative and presented the basis for a regional approach for conserving wildlife corridors, biodiversity, and ecological connectivity in the region. And the paradigm underpinning Kootenay Connect is that landscape linkages focusing on low elevation, large riparian wetland complexes are essential for conserving biodiversity, movement corridors, and ecological functions in the Kootenay region of BC. So Kootenay Connect included 12 target corridors throughout the Kootenay region, which is here in the map. And we identified places that had high ecological value, intact grizzly bear habitat, based on Michael's extensive research, and because grizzly bears are a fairly good umbrella species for other species needs in our region, riparian and wetland areas, and local champions. And by that, we were looking for places where there were groups with diverse interests that had a history, a track record of working well together on private and public land conservation and stewardship efforts. And as you can see from the slide, we plan to deliver Kootenay Connect over 3 years with cohorts comprised of 4 corridors per year. And early on, we identified the Wycliffe Wildlife Corridor and the Columbia Valley Wetlands, the Creston Valley, and the Bonanza Biodiversity Corridor, located between Slocan and Summit Lakes here in the Slocan Valley, as starting places for the initiative. And this was our year 1 cohort marked, as you can see there, with red stars. Then in April of 2019, KCP and over 20 of its partners that we identified as working in these 4 corridors started collaborating on a proposal to Environment and Climate Change Canada's community nominated Priority Places program that's funded through the Canada Nature Fund. And the purpose of this program is to protect and restore species at risk, their habitat, and ecological connectivity. And in late August, ECCC notified us we were successful and would receive $2 million over 4 years for these 4 connectivity areas, our year 1 Kootenay Connect cohort. So that gave our first year an unexpected huge boost. And it felt like all of a sudden we were on steroids trying to figure out how to make everything work for these 4 corridors. So when we fast forward to today, we're now in year 3 of Kootenay Connect's ECCC funded work. And we are supporting the delivery of over 50 projects in these 4 corridors, benefiting over 30 species at risk and 35 species of special concern and interest in the habitats they depend upon. And this ECCC funded Kootenay Connect has been running parallel to the original vision of the 12 corridors forming a regional network of connectivity areas. So back to today, and the purpose of this meeting is that this is the 9th corridor, and Kootenay Connect's 9th meeting that we've hosted based on our original, our vision. And again, if you look at the map, you'll see that we started off with year 1 with the 4 corridors I've mentioned. Then in year 2, we've held workshops in the Duncan Lardot, the Slocan River Valley, the Columbia Lake area, and the Golden area, and they're marked in purple stars. And several of these meetings have occurred in conjunction with KCP, like this one. And then this year, being year 3, our final year of the original project, the focal corridors are marked in light blue stars and include the Elk Valley, of course, and the Kootenay area, the Retallick corridor, which is linking Kootenay Glacier and the Goat Range in the central Selkirks, and the Salmo River Valley. So you're part of our cohort for this year. So our vision for Kootenay Connect is to add the landscape scale connectivity dimension to conserving biodiversity, to integrate conservation and management efforts across ecosystems and jurisdictions to promote climate change resilience, and help kickstart connectivity conservation collaboratives in the Kootenays where they're not yet occurring. And so are the 4 pillars of what we look to that are supporting our work is that we're blending science and community-based approaches to large landscape conservation by identifying connectivity areas focused on wildlife corridors, biodiversity hotspots, and climate change refugia. We're integrating climate modeling to identify the highest priority areas in which to retain landscape connectivity as habitats shift over time. We're assessing threats and the opportunities for addressing them through strategies that will enable the ability of ecological networks to connect different landscape elements and elevational gradients for all species. And importantly, we're initiating governmental and public recognition of Kootenay Connect's multi-species, multi-jurisdictional corridors as wildlife and ecological corridors to influence policy and management using a variety of strategies and incentives and legislative and regulatory tools. Now, as we were putting all this together, Michael and I realized that what we were aspiring was to make that local to global connection. Both of us are on a committee or commission that is a connectivity working group as part of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas. And there's just been a lot over this listserv the last few years. But when this report came out in 2020, it just, again, helped put the foundation underneath us and validate how Kootenay Connect can fit into, nest into a larger global view. And so I just want to underscore here that, you know, part of the reason that we're doing the work we do is really the acknowledgement and anticipation of what's needed for climate change and how to be resilient and adaptive in terms of how we look at our landscapes. And so, you know, as highlighted here, during this time of rapid climate change, conservation efforts need to increase biological and ecosystem resilience and provide opportunities for species to adapt to the changing conditions. And so when large terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems are connected, they're more resilient to climate change because ecological processes that are important for ecosystem stability are able to function, and species are able to move and shift, and their ranges are able to adapt to new environments and climates. And that's really where all of this is headed in terms of our work. We've captured much of the work over the last 2 years in 2 extensive reports, and the one marked year 2 is our most current one, and it can be found on our webpage, the Kootenay Connect webpage that is part of KCP's website, and the address is right there. And in this year 2 report, you'll find results from the 8 corridors that we've been working on the last 2 years. Lots of great information, lots of great maps, lots of great recommendations. And we hope that today we end up with being able to capture many things for the Elk Valley that we can help you move forward on. So I'll now turn it over to Michael who'd share his screen, and I'll stop sharing. And he'll continue the story and also provide examples of Kootenay Connect's results, and we'll continue on with the conversation.
This is all about multiple ecological cross-valley corridors a little bit today. Let me see if I can make my thing function. There we go. I'm just going to touch on a couple little things, pick up where Marcy left off. We weren't quite sure what each other's going to say, but there's that same report. But what I want to what I'm going to try to talk about today, first is what is an ecological corridor, but what does that mean in the Kootenays? So by the time I'm done, you're going to have a pretty good feel with it, but it's different everywhere in the Kootenays. It's different at each corridor we encounter, but it's basically the movement of everything, genes and species and ecosystems and processes. But what's really interesting is needs to be considered. It's sort of a defined geographical space, and it's of course managed and recognized and established. And also, probably the most important thing is ecological corridor is not another park. It's not where we keep people out. It's not where we do maybe change our activities and maybe reduce them, but all sorts of things can happen in there, but they're done in a more of a ecological connectivity, wildlife friendly way. We all realize we live in these, we all live in the human settled valleys, the arena of conservation and a lot of the arena of fragmentation, the arena of our problems. So I like to really stress that this is not another park. You don't have to worry about, you're going out creating yet another park. We're trying to integrate the way humans live in among around people. And this, of course, really big important point is this. I've given this talk to the government quite a bit. It really does include public and private land, which brings a whole bunch of challenges. As that gentleman talked about this morning about his riparian funding, it was tough. The funders want to do this or maybe that, but never both. So at any rate, this is really a cool slide I made. I've seen it pop up on other people's talks. They steal them off the internet, but this is some of the ecological corridor projects around the world. And why I like to bring this up is to say, we're just another, yet I used to think, oh, what are the first people doing this? But we are not. It's really happening all over the world. It's a global initiative response to an obvious problem by ecologists everywhere. And I'm gonna give you a tiny little bit of history about me. I started out as a grizzly bear scientist, published a paper on fragmentation of bears. You can see on the left there, these yellow dotted lines are mainly sort of where females are not moving between populations. Actually, they're moving quite a bit, as you see with Clayton, but often in the old days, they're getting killed and leaving these genetic fractures that we could detect and to show this fragment, like a broken windshield of grizzly bear distribution. Then I spent 15 years putting radio collars on bears and identifying critical habitats and then modeling corridors where we might focus our human energy on humans to help bears move back and forth across this world. I did not do my data. It was not built in the Southern Rockies. It was built here, but I used this because Clayton Apps and other people had predicted corridors, and I used it as a way to validate my model. Could I predict with my model what other areas did? And so far, they seem to be consistent. And then as a method to create employment for myself, I went out and decided to fix that problem and spent 15 years radio collaring and then also implementing conservation solutions, connectivity solutions, which are a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to go through what they are. And then we measured pre and post effects. And, after 15 years of a lot of different things we did, we ended up really noticing a lot of more movement, males and females, not a ton of females yet. So anyway, it was a validation that's kind of working. And when I did that, I got done with it. I was sitting there looking at it. And, I've always been more interested in turtles than I have bears. I'll be really honest with you. So I just started noticing a lot of the predicted corridors, and the Kootenays were over these wetland riparian areas. One reason is all our valleys are wetland riparian areas. But another is often they're, been protected at some level and there are not so many people living in it. And they're also good habitat and rich environments. So I started hatching this idea, talking to government like 10 years ago about creating what I'd call multi-species corridors. And then of course I bumped into Marcy and Juliet and we started talking about it, and boom, we decided to try this beyond bears. This is under the bear umbrella. And I want to Marcy did an extremely good job of explaining FWCP and KCP and Environment Canada and their relation to Kootenay Connect, but she didn't put this up, so I wasn't sure she was going to do such a good job, but I think she's covered it really well. But the overarching original project was we were going to be this catalytic enzyme to develop this idea of selling this to our region. And then, of course, we had this giant success. We got suckered into writing a proposal for ECC, and I sent around the email the day we got it. I said, oh my God, bummer, we got this $2 million. So we were off to the races, whether we wanted to or not. So it is within this, but and you're going to hear today a lot of the things that we have done with that money, and then how Kootenay Connect can actually translate into an area. I do not necessarily, it's not a foregone conclusion that Kootenay Connect can dovetail or fit into your area. That's up to you. I'm going to tell you what we do and what we've done. And I want you guys, as I go through a lot of this stuff, to think, is this relevant to us? Is this something we're doing anyway? Or we could help or whatever. I couldn't care less. I'm 71.9. I'm happy with any answer. But at any rate, here's a map of our Kootenay Connect. There's the 4 basic corridors in there, and then we've been to 3 or 4 more in the Lardo Valley and the Slocan and Columbia Lake, et cetera. And we're over here today. And I'm going to go through an example of Crescent Valley. We're going to see what is an ecological corridor, what goes into an ecological corridor, what the hell does that mean? So it's down there. Of course, my goal in the early days with bears was to get them moving back across that valley. The Selkirks to the west there was one of the most isolated populations in North America outside of Yellowstone, even though it was only separated by about 5 or 6 kilometers of land. It was kind of crazy. So I thought I'd see if I could fix that up, get some bears moving along the way there. And this is what, and then that of course blossomed out into a whole bunch of other species, kind of cool. But here's that area. First thing we did was sort of define an area where we concentrate our thinking. Of course, we think outside those boundaries all the time. I basically think from Yellowstone to Yukon almost every time I do anything. But basically, we get a defined area where we can think. We throw on the protected layers. There's the wildlife management areas. This is Dark Woods, a huge piece of, like now it's about 700 square kilometers of land that they own, and they can manage how they see fit. And it's very powerful. Here's a human environment. These are all the houses. There's all the private land. Dark Woods is private. You can see that. And you can see the valley is just sort of choked with private land and people. It's kind of a challenge to get wildlife and ecology moving through there. And then, of course, there's the human environment, a little extended with all the roads, backcountry roads, forestry roads, et cetera. And there's the riparian wetland area. And you can see the big overlap here. And this is one of the areas that started making this connection in my head. How to integrate riparian areas into this whole bigger thinking. And here's kind of a cool example. Here's a western toad breeding pond. I've got a developing map of breeding ponds all over the Kootenay area, and they move about 7 to 8 kilometers outside of those each time, but they also funnel and feed sort of a larger western toad metapopulation. They're a nice ambassador for valley bottom to upland amphibian populations, and they turn out to be pretty important, and they turn out to be impacted by people. But that's just one small example. The next slide is a northern leopard frog study area. This is going on in that region. There's a recovery team. They've been doing it for decades, and it turned out that the grizzly bear corridors we have eventually identified were also a leopard frog corridor, of course much smaller. But anyway, there was this unbelievably nice link. And John Krebs and I sat in the office and dubbed this area the frog bear conservation area a long time ago. And we started making that connection. What the goal was to use the charisma and iconic money draw of grizzly bears to fund grizzly bear, but also frog conservation efforts. It's kind of a cool thing. They're Canada's most endangered leopard frog populations right there. This was a grizzly bear research we did. The green I just flashed on the screen is the core habitat areas based on 15 years of telemetry work. And these are the places we wanted to connect over there. And then these are some Clayton Lamb and I have been working on huckleberry patches important to bears around the Kootenay region. Here's a layer of those. There's a reason I'm showing you all this stuff. And then my modeling ended up showing that this area in here was a very good, important connectivity. This is what I would really call an extreme example of science for the obvious, and I'm really good at that. If it's obvious stuff, I'll be able to figure it out, and not even for that much money. But at any rate, so we are going to focus some energy into there. And just so you don't think it's not all about bears, we discovered while we were working in that area, actually, we had a bear we caught over in halfway to the East Kootenays who came over here every spring and went down out onto the Crescent Flats. And he came out in what I dubbed the 20-inch linkage zone. So I put a camera up there, and I just, got all manner of ungulates and carnivores, primates, and even had a grizzly bear go through there. I didn't get him on the camera, but I was radio telemetry work there. So it's a full-fledged large mammal corridor in there, just one simple little spot, and they could access the valley bottom. These are some other things we did. Every green star is a cost share electric fence in that area. One of the things we want to do is reduce those conflicts. We've been doing that since 2012. It's about 9 years now. We spent a couple $100,000 on cost share. It's been pretty effective. In the backcountry, this is the point of this next few points, is it's not just about the valley bottom. It's about that whole arena. And you can see already I've moved outside my my border of the Crescent area, but the Nature Conservancy, not the provincial government, they don't get credit for this, but the Nature Conservancy's continued a long-term access management program in the area that now is funneled on grizzly bear and caribou. And it's centered around a lot of the Huckleberry patch. Has been unbelievably effective for recovering grizzly bear populations in this threatened isolated population. That's made a huge change in I'm not going to go through that, but it's really been a big deal. Also, that research, the Huckleberry research we did, it's just trying to be published right now. It's in review, but it is, we've leaked it out because we believe in it, and the government's using it for a commercial Huckleberry ban. We ended up using it to draw some of the hotspots where bears are using the huckleberries. Huckleberries are everywhere, but this is where the bears are concentrating on them. So these are this is part of an ecological corridor. It extends beyond that valley bottom. It goes into all manner of access and habitat. And this is grizzly bear stuff here, but it applies to sheep and goats and elk in your area very clearly. So it's I'm trying to stimulate us all to think big here. Also, this is really cool. The Kootenay Connect money that we've got, the Environment Canada money, has one of the things, because this is a corridor, Nature Conservancy bought a whole bunch of land in here. You can see these blue pieces of land were purchased by the Nature Conservancy for connectivity to create this natural corridor across here. We've been working with them since a long time ago. I think I met Marcy at a field tour when she was working for KCP at some point. And now it's Richard Klofsky's territory. But at any rate, that part of that money is actually, it's not so much just to identify it and to own it, but we actually got to rehab it. It's just a big field, partially full of cows and full of sometimes herbicides and improper, poorly timed agriculture processes that chop the heads off frogs or whatever it might be. So we've decided that we need to get in there and really study it and rehab. And this money that we got has been part of that. And I've hired a landscape architect. We've all put our brains in there, Richard Klofsky and the First Nations, and we're rehabbing frog habitat and then making it good for carnivores to move in. A pretty serious rehab thing. We've also, this is really a cool little story about leopard frogs. The red is where we use some money to rehab the leopard frog, making hydrologic connectivity of the waterways within this wetlands. And these wetland channels that have been choked with vegetation, slowing down the water, were gone in, they opened them up, cleaned them out. Within 1 year, they just completely changed. And then in the next year, and nobody knows I put a bunch of mechanical frog egg masses down in there just to show it worked, but it really did work. The frog team was sending us emails all spring. I mean, oh my God, the new area full of water is just full of egg masses in 2020. And this year we got the same response, another big dose of egg masses. And they're using those to, they use those to, help establish populations elsewhere. Unfortunately, this population is having a hard time, but they're looking around for more sites. But cool thing is it's just definitely some ECC Kootenay Connect money that made this work. So really, you can ask yourself, Crescent Valley Wildlife Manager is very organized, been there for a long time. It's got full-time managers with full-time wages. They're very well aware of the issues. They're reasonably funded. So what could we offer? Well, it turns out conservation work is never done. We sort of offered them a bigger vision and some money. Money is pretty useful in this world. And, right now, the Nature Conservancy, after many years of work, even before Kootenay Connect got started, is we sort of created this idea that this area is a cultural culturally respected and recognized conservation area, the Frog Bear Conservation Corridor. And this sign is down there in the valley. And the people, I think most people kind of come to accept it. I'm not saying everybody likes it. I've never been shot at as I drive through that valley. But, anyway, so that was the longest example. And real quickly, I'm going to just hit Wycliffe area, which is outside of Cranbrook, between Cranbrook and Kimberley. And, it has several consortium of organizations, and Nature Conservancy Canada is there, Nature Trust of BC, the BC government, and First Nations are very organized, reasonably funded, very well aware of the issues. What could we offer? Basically, in the end, all we've really offered is money. They're too well organized. It's a perfect group to help with, and they've plugged in and used our injection of that money to continue improving what they're already doing. So we just kind of get out of the way. They're really effective. Richard and Chris Bosman, Joe Strong, et cetera. And Alana Ostrich, I think, is involved with them. They really do a good job. What they've used our money for is they're assessing some species at risk, Lewis woodpecker, Williamson sadsucker habitat restoration, and then grassland management and invasive species management. They're getting pretty involved in that. We're going to look at the Bonanza corridor you've heard a little bit about. They're also pretty well organized with the Slocan Stewardship Society. Excuse me, Marcy, I'm not sure swamp is a group, but it's something. It's a wetlands group, and they got a lot of good local biologists over there, are also reasonably organized, partially funded, and well aware of their issues. So what we've offered them is a bit of a focus, and kind of we've focused in on the Bonanza and brought them some good money, and we've provided this landscape vision. They're thinking now well beyond their borders into the adjacent parks, and we've also brought some money to them. And they've been doing some really cool wetland restoration, getting right in there. They did a big survey on wetlands, find out what needed to be done. There's some old railroad blockages that have sort of caused some dysfunction, and they've also done some beaver activity assessment. Turns out beavers are our major friend. They've done some ecosystem mapping, identified the real old growth forests, not the legal old growth forests. These are the ones that are out there. And they've gotten into fisheries restoration on the Bonanza Creek between Summit Lake and the thing. And they're actually going out restoring Kootenay, et cetera. There's some real on the ground stuff. Columbia Wetlands is the biggest most complex of our organizations. It's about 180 kilometers long. It's one big wetland. It's already protected in a WMA. You might think, gee, what do we need to do there? Anyway, they have a large consortium of people working up there. It's a rich private land conservation culture there. They've got their own conservation fund in the region, and they're also very well aware. But we've also provided a focus, a landscape vision, and money. And this, it's even been worse from my perspective, is we've been integrated or lured in or drank their Kool-Aid, and we're part of their conservation planning team. I just got back from a 3-day meeting over there. And so, it just depends. The point is that the spectrum of our influence goes from just giving money to the Wycliffe people to actually being on the team up here, because this is such a big, complex thing. And so I'm just going to show you real quickly some of the things. That's the human private land, houses, roads, landscape along that valley. And, we needed to figure out where are the wildlife corridors over that 180 kilometers. It sort of all is one corridor, but it's a corridor for the north-south, very important corridor for climate shifts, for ecosystems and species. That's an undeniable. We don't need to study that any longer. It's a north-south corridor, but where are the east-west corridors? So over 2 years, we had Rachel Darville go out, local species at risk biologist, and gather all the literature, everything known about species at risk in the valley, and then do several years of field work. And she put together this really detailed beginning assessment of what are the values, what are those species at risk, culturally significant critters that are small. This is just my map showing you that the wetlands is a big, it's already a big north-south wetland corridor. It's crazy. And then I took on looking at large carnivores. We took grizzly bear data. We commissioned the elk model that was been run by Kelly Mulligan for her master's degree out of U of A to extend her model up north. We got a good elk layers. We've gotten our the wolverine density and marmot habitat layer and took it to the wolverine biologists who collected the data and had them help us estimate where wolverine corridors were. We're using data plus expert opinion here. I know Mark Sawaya is rolling in eyes. I say, when you get your database map, we'll replace it here. But in the meantime, I think that, you know, we're going to move ahead with some thinking with expert opinion and what data we have. Same with the mountain goat model. We've integrated them together. When you put all that together into a big assessment, we picked out some areas where we think cross valley corridors will be important. That's almost the whole damn valley, as you can see. So with our better judgment in mind and not to ask for the moon, we boiled it down to, we let the local experts pick what might be the most important areas to focus on. And then we took a lot of that information and we paid somebody who knows the area on the ground really well, basically Rachel Darville, to go in and use all her species at risk and our corridor data and estimate conservation opportunities. We realized we couldn't call them biodiversity hotspots. The whole thing is a biodiversity hotspot. So we wanted to find out about opportunities for conservation. And Anj's comment earlier about, or no, that was the lady from TAC, which solutions are possible versus what might do. That was a very good comment. These are itemized conservation opportunities that are possible and not so much dreamy. So we're trying to make that link. We're taking that to a much further step. We're formalizing it with some more quantitative analyses and taking it forth to the powers that be. Kootenay Conservation Program will be the gatekeeper to run this through Nature Trust and Farmland Advantage and NCC and stewardship issues, and even the regional districts. They have a really good planning departments. They've itemized ecological communities at risk up and down the whole valley. We've identified a lot of communities that are at risk within there, done some pretty cool habitat mapping up and down the valley. And we've done some we have 4 programs going now for other programs to actually do some on-ground improvements from all those surveys. For instance, the Western painted turtle that now we've realized there's a few in the Fernie area, you know, they're really short on basking logs. So we've got a basking log program. We've also got a program to protect their nesting sites. They're often right next to roads and a bunch of stuff. So there's each one of these ones has a particular thing we're trying to do to enhance those particular species. Probably the coolest thing, one of the coolest things to me is a larger systemic issue, which is a big deal, may not be super relevant to you, although you guys do have your own set of river problems over there in the Fernie, but the Columbia Wetlands, this big, huge, giant functioning wetlands, and it's protected mostly in our WMA. And you might think, well, who cares? Everything's fine there. But the truth is, it's not necessarily. It's under a bit of threat from climate change. They've got a lot of our money has gone to hire some academics and local hydrologists to try to come to understand the change that climate change might bring, and if we can manage it in a way to help that through, you know, the way water overflows the banks of the river, the Columbia River, and feeds those wetlands on the edges, and the way that ebb and flow happens. It's the breathing of the wetlands is really important and really going to change with water flows. The map on the right is showing like a 20 or 25 year water loss areas. The red are areas that have a slow decrease in water in the wetlands for a variety of reasons, trying to figure out why. The point is we're trying to understand that hydrology, so we might manage it better to keep that wetlands. Those wetlands are some of the management for climate change resilience through flood control and a whole raft of, other aspects, climate refugia and its north-south corridor, and there's a whole lot of reasons to keep that functioning. We've also got a bat and a heron project going over there. I'm not going to go through a lot of the details, doing some, it's been pretty cool. So, you know, that's the end of that little tour. I'm not going to talk about the things we're doing in the others, Golden, Columbia Lake, Lardo, and Slocan. They're not as advanced. They're in the sort of stages that Fernie's in, but we've, in those areas, we've helped organize the locals and focus their thinking and helping them move forward, trying to get money and develop some plans. So, you know, just real quickly to summarize here, you know, there's other answers to what can Kootenay Connect offer. We do offer that landscape level vision that goes well beyond Fernie. It goes all the way up to Revelstoke and beyond. We've been pretty successful at data gathering from diverse sources, from private and in the government, and even within the government, different divisions won't be sharing their data as much, and we tend to bring that together a little bit and get people talking. And also we're integrating the private and the public spheres pretty well. Often we have the regional district planners at our meetings. And then we have this inter-corridor integration. We're learning and sharing across corridor. It's been unbelievably effective and pretty cool. What we learn in one area and we apply to another, and it ends up helping at a regional level. And we put a climate lens. We tend to hire Greg Utsik to be our climate lens focuser, and he's extremely good. And we send him into every area and find, is there a climate corridor that we need to be considering? Are there other aspects about how to resist catastrophic fire that's going to change our ecosystems from forests into grasslands, et cetera? He's a very good forward thinker. We use him of that. And then, of course, we always have the value of more damn meetings. That's one of the big things we offer. So your answer to what can Kootenay Connect offer, and I'm going to tell you what the perfect answer is right now. We've got this. We don't need Kootenay Connect. I'm 71.9, and I've been rebuilding this canoe I built 30 years ago as a hippie, and I'm pretty happy. So we don't need more work. So unless you see a reason for us, and there may be, but it's really up to you. And I know Marcy and luckily Marcy and Juliet are on mute right now, and they can't tell me this, but I'm not much of a salesman. I'm, lead by example. And if you're interested, you're interested. And so in the Elk Valley, I'm going to wind up here a few slides with what we have there. Normally, I really do a big job on this, but like I say, I didn't. This is my old research that I did in the Selkirks. We transferred it over to the Elk Valley, trying to estimate grizzly bear corridors, the flaming red, the arrows are Clayton Apps's effort from 2007. There was some good congruence. And then there's the Lamb et al. Paper who, showed it as an ecological trap, the whole elk horseshoe here, how animals are coming in and not very many are going out. They're getting killed there. And then there's Lamb et al. 2021 or 23. This is his grizzly bear habitat and corridor model. I'm sure it's coming soon, but its value is it will be with local data. I feel like when I met Clayton Lamb, we took him into our world a little bit, and I feel like all I really did with him was light his rocket fuse. He's full of rocket fuel, and anyway, he's just been amazing. So anyway, he'll probably have an updated version of that. It may have the same answer, but it may have a more refined, better local answer. Very important to get that science-based. And of course, you've seen he's been Pool and Lamb et al. Or been fiddling around with a lot of elk stuff and elk movements. They've got some good data there. You've got your outdoor access guide, where you've got access management, where a lot of roads have been closed or shut down seasonally. And then you've got your cumulative effects analysis with layer after layer after layer. You're seeing, and the growth in coal mining over there. There's a lot happening on there. And normally I would go in and get all this stuff and have it to present. But to be honest, it's end of summer and I didn't really want to do that. So, there's just too much. Unless you guys were interested, there's no use for me to go do all this work. And then you've got bighorn sheep winter range been identified. We heard a little bit about that this morning. And you've got your connectivity enhancement is ongoing. You guys know all about what you're doing. The Lee, Clevenger, and Lamb stuff that he talked about this morning is very, very impressive. And you saw this, all this stuff is very good. Clayton, there's Clayton Lamb again. You just can't get rid of his name, can you? It's everywhere I turn. Basically, me and him did this. He was just too young to stick higher up on the author list at the time. But he had a lot to do with this with me. Him and I were the brainchilds running around behind the scenes making this happen. But we put together a big report on everything you needed to know about roads, grizzly bears, and it's now a peer-reviewed paper, but it is informing the process all over. And it's been a decent tool for motive and what to do. And then, of course, I got another big paper coming out. Lamb's, at least he's a second author there where he deserves to be. He's helped really a lot with his Huckleberry patch research, where I'm showing that Huckleberry, with a lot of roads, where there's a lot of Huckleberry patches, it does not translate into density or reproduction. It really mechanistically influences the reproduction and the density of bears. So it'll be a really potent paper. And I guess we already mentioned the Huckleberry band, some of the stuff that you guys are doing over there. These are in your area, some of those good Huckleberry patches. And then this is, just a map of your human environment with a hypothetical straw dog, maybe total BS, Kootenay Connect, Fernie or Elk Valley corridor. It could go anywhere. We usually just go to the height of land of the watersheds, but which I just took up to the top of the Elk River and brought it down here. Just a hypothetical thing. It could include the Flathead. It could include parts of Alberta. It could do anything you want. But basically, I did not put together all those layers that we normally do, where we could then start picking this apart, because I sort of, from my standpoint, I got to hear from you guys that you kind of care and are interested, and maybe you guys will do all that, and you somehow or other we could help or whatever. So I think that's pretty much all I had to say. Okay, team.
Okay, well, I'll take it over right now for a sec, Michael here. So if everybody could turn back on your cameras, that would be great. So we know who's still here. I saw that Ange had to leave us, and I don't know if we've had anyone else leave, but I just want to check back in. So we've put out a bunch of information to you, and I thought this would be a time to check in and just see if there's any questions, comments, have a little bit of discussion before we potentially start talking about, what would be something that you could see Kootenay Connect working with you on, how we would think about looking at the landscape in terms of conservation connectivity. But first, let's see if there's any comments or questions.
I would just say, I learned a whole bunch. that was so overwhelming, Michael. It was there's a lot there, but the one thing I'm taking out of this is, not being the biologist, is the importance of the connectivity. And I've heard Clayton speak to it before, but I really got my eyes open there. So appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and I apologize to people who've known a lot of that stuff, but I've been asked by a lot of people, what do you guys do? So it was really just a thing to bring it to, maybe Christina Small doesn't know what tech does. She knows what tech does. Maybe she doesn't know what Kootenay Connect does. So the same thing for Steve and some of the people I don't know so well. So I apologize for those of you who know it, all this stuff, but it's what we do or have done.
Impressive.
Oh, one other point. It has increased my fundraising potential from bears to ecological factors by almost 100-fold. So you can raise X amount of money for grizzly bears, and you can almost raise X times 100 for that broader spectrum of nature. It really is, and these corridors are benefiting grizzly bears. It's the reverse umbrella. I turn the umbrella inside out, and it's pretty effective. It doesn't always help bears, but it does.
And one of the things that I think, during my presentation, we talked about the champions within various corridors. And so one of my excitement would be the word of coming in, talking to all you guys from the Elk Valley, as I know that there's such a great group of people and really diverse interests, and thinking that, in terms of how much you're doing, and it may be that you have a lot of the data, the information, the mapping, all of that, and maybe there's some potential to just help leverage the partnerships or the collaborative pieces in terms of projects. So anyway, I just want to open up that, we're really open to any of the aspects of the work that you sort of have seen that Michael and I have been able to sort of be the enzymes for. And for some of these areas, it really has been pulling together the data, the mapping, thinking about the conservation, opportunities, looking at protected areas and networks and that. But, it would be really helpful to hear from you guys, because we're feeling humble coming to you rather than thinking, hey, maybe there's some things you've never heard before.
Yeah, Clayton Lamb is the best data gatherer I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think Michael touched on it well, that maybe we are in a different position than these other places, but I still think that there's a really important role that Kootenay Connect could play, and I think that there's kind of an opportunity to be an umbrella for a lot of the actions that we're seeing here, you know, like we're talking about bighorn sheep, which, you know, are getting hit on the highway on the eastern portion of our connectivity zone on the Alberta highway portion, or kind of where the BC meshes into Alberta there. And then, you know, thinking about riparian areas on the western side of our kind of Hosmer to Alberta portion is such an important riparian area, like, you know, that right where the concrete plant is there is a key place where a riparian habitat that bears are crossing, and that's kind of the western portion of our highway project. And then kind of thinking about multi-species connectivity, of course, we're hanging our hat on grizzly bears and sheep and elk and wolverines, but you know, at some point we'll dig up that highway and build an overpass and an underpass, and there's opportunities to think about, you know, maybe a 1 foot wide pipe needs to go beside these giant underpasses for you know, other species. So I think, at least from my perspective, and I think I can speak for the team, that the door is always open from our side, and you know, it is at a point where, you know, we don't need any more data. I'd say that, like, I don't really think we need any more government available data. We need sort of partners to help move what is a shovel ready project over the finish line. And that is why we're kind of in a different place. I mean, these structures are ready. We have blueprints ready for them. And, you know, we're just sort of at a point where we're right at the tipping point to get it done, but we're sort of teetering back and forth, looking at either side of the mountain at the moment.
Yeah,